Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Warriors of the Trenches. This podcast is designed as a podcast to highlight members of services who serve in the armed forces and are currently doing other things to continue to serve, and we're going to talk about life experiences here. So, without further ado, my guest now, his name is Matt. He's the owner of Veterans Fishing. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing great, brother. How are you?
Pretty good. Hey, this has been a long time coming. Like our schedules didn't match up, so we finally got this thing going. It's 4th of July weekend, so I'm ready to get this thing started. So if you could, tell us a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, where you grew up, and just some stuff like that.
So I'm originally from Maine, grew up in Maine, born in Maine, and had a little bit of a interesting childhood. I don't want to necessarily say it was wild or different than anybody else's, but it was different for me. And lost my dad at an early age when I was 7. It was actually, today is 24 years since that day. So I'm at the age now where I don't necessarily just spend a day being sad about that. I more or less just reflect on what I've done since that time as a kid. But just grew up mostly in Maine and a fairly normal upbringing with the exception of certain relatives passing throughout childhood. I think that happens for a lot of us. Mm-hmm. But basically played a lot of sports, fished a lot when I could. Like most 90s kids or 80s kids, I was outside every chance I got. And as a young kid, you learn to idolize like Top Gun and G.I. Joe. And we used to play guns in the woods. That was like a game, like bang, bang, bang. I got you first. I got you first. So I was always outside, just getting into trouble, doing stuff, with my friends, with my brother, whatever. But then as I got a little older, and also a new stepfather introduced into the picture, I just started being kind of a rebellious teen. Again, nothing out of the ordinary for a lot of us, but just got into trouble, typical stuff, fighting, drinking, partying. I got sent off to boarding school. So to make a long story long, I spent 6 years in high school. It took me a couple extra years to get it. You can laugh at that. It's okay. And I've thought from time to time how my life could have been different if I had graduated on time, but I don't waste time with that anymore. But 9/11 had happened and I had already thought about the Marines, and that solidified everything for me. At that point, like I didn't have college offers. My grades were just, slightly above average or average. I excelled at some sports, but not enough to go full ride, anything like that. But yeah, the Marine Corps was the path straight out of high school.
So you said that did you like gravitate towards certain sports, and like what species really got you into fishing?
So sports was my entire life as a kid. I played baseball, basketball as a young kid, and then I found hockey in middle school. I had played hockey, like pond hockey prior to that, but competitively, like 5th, 6th grade is when I really started getting into it. Played all the way through sophomore year, and then until I moved, they didn't have a hockey team. I went to a know-nothing town in New Hampshire where the mascot was called the Mules, and they didn't have many sports. So that's why I started getting in a little trouble there. But as far as fishing goes, it was largemouth bass. My dad was a trout fisherman, a fly fisherman. Used to hit up, the Salmon River in New York and a whole bunch of different places, but fly fishing just wasn't for me. I didn't pick it up easy as a kid, so I went the other way. And I hit golf courses near my house like hard when I was a kid for largemouth.
Yeah, it seems to be like almost like especially now with social media, that's like the gateway drug for fishermen. It's you see like 12, 13, 14-year-olds rolling up, like their grandpa's bringing them to a pond, and they're throwing all kinds of stuff. So it's kind of like the gateway drug for
It
fishing now.
absolutely is. And so much so in my case that I would say the most I got in trouble in high school was a friend of mine had convinced me of how easily stealing fishing equipment from Walmart was.
Oh,
Lures, rods, reels, it was bad. We weren't reselling it. We weren't doing anything other than using it. But either way, it was terribly wrong. And I got caught with a van full of equipment that didn't belong to me. And I had to be driven back by my parents to the Walmart, push it all back into the front door. And the manager came out and told me I'm never allowed back in Walmart ever again.
man.
So that's how hard I was for bass back then.
Yeah. So you said 9/11 happened, and you said you had the Marine Corps already decided. What do you remember about that day, and like what made you dead set on the Marine Corps and over the other branches?
There was a couple guys that I went to boarding school with up in Bath, Maine, that chose the path of being a Marine, and I just remember them coming back to visit in uniform, and just the way they had changed, because everybody that was at this boarding school was some sort of degenerate kid in some fashion or another. And I started looking into it when they were talking about it, and it just seemed like the hardest. And I even at that age, I sought out physical challenges and trying to go for something that was the best, or varsity sports, or whatever it was. So my dad was Army, and I really thought a lot about that. But being a young kid, the way that my dad's death was handled by the military, because it was Agent Orange related, and they denied the whole thing.
Oh.
I was almost taught to have kind of a sour taste in my mouth about not just the Army, but I guess the government a little bit in general. So the Marines just seemed like the most rebellious, the most hard, got to go do the most action and fun stuff. And I didn't want to be sitting around twiddling my thumbs. So I joined the Marines and picked open contract and got sent to artillery and trained all up for artillery. And then we ended up going to Kuwait and Iraq as first time as a guard force attachment, and then my second time to Iraq was for as a provisional rifleman.
Yeah, so you talk about when you talk about the other branches, the Marine Corps is the only one that's actually earned. The rest you just go through your stuff, but the Marine Corps, you get to get the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, and that's what I think. That's what makes everything so great is that those 13 weeks, and then you get that bad boy slapped on you, and I think that's what feels great. So, you said your dad was Army. How did you go about telling your family that you decided, hey, I'm going into the Marine Corps?
I think they kind of knew that may be one of my only options, so I don't recall them being shocked about it. Mm-hmm. But I do remember my mom being a mom and just being worried and nervous and writing letters from day one every chance she got. But I had already been talking to a recruiter before I knew I was doing a 6th year in high school, because I was expecting to graduate in 2001. Mm-hmm. Before that, 2000. So I was already thinking about this stuff as a junior 3 times in a row. So I had already kind of had my mind made up by the time I knew I was finally going to be graduating high school. I had already had my hand this high in the sky, ready to swear in. And when 9/11 happened, I'm like, boom. And I was definitely part of a huge crowd of guys that were there for the same reason. Mm-hmm. That just were pushed over the edge when that took place and to sign. And we were all ready, so we thought, to go fight bad guys.
Yeah, and I can imagine being like a junior or a senior at that point in time. Like I was in fifth grade, sitting in a fifth grade math class when that stuff
Man,
happened. So
I didn't know there was that big of an age gap, but thank you for that.
yeah,
I appreciate it.
but yeah, like it's kind of when you're that age, it's kind of in the back of your mind because you know like 11 years old or so, and then from like 11 to 18 or 11 to 21, you're probably like, damn, this is like the real thing, this is what I think I'm gonna do. And like that and to go off topic a little bit, like that never crossed my mind until I was like a senior in high school. Like I could have went to college, but I was like, no, that's not what I want to do. I'm trying something a little harder. So I ended up going to the Marine Corps for almost the same exact reasons you did. But I just wanted a challenge, and that's what I like to do now. Is I like to do things that are challenging to me. So,
Dude, that sums it up. I mean, every Marine that I'm friends with seeks out the path of most resistance sometimes,
yeah,
and it's just it almost breeds you to be a little bit extra hard headed. But I mean, when 9/11 actually took place, I was kicked out of boarding school. I had been kicked out, and the only way I was allowed back was to do another junior year. And I was like very rebellious about that idea. And so that happened that morning, and I was literally on a lumber delivery, and we didn't have cell phones. So I skipped my delivery and went straight back to my house, my parents' house, and basically watched the whole thing unfold. And my mom was just bugging out, and it was a day. Everybody has their own reaction to that day. I feel guilty ever even saying what mine was because of all the families that were directly affected.
mm-hmm.
I try not to take anything away from what they went through, but it hurt everybody in this country in a certain way when it took place. And I mean, you might have been just at the age where you're old enough to be like, something's really wrong here.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
and you said when you were getting ready to go to the military, that you had like this disdain for the government already because what had happened with your father and stuff like that. So what was your perception of the military and or government before, and how does it change after the fact, after you had joined?
So I certainly don't want to put off the thinking that I was like any sort of anti-government kid
Right.
prior to the military, but the way that I had been told that certain events surrounding my dad's death and how it was paid for, who was compensated, as a kid, you don't know any of that. But like I had family, like he had 2 kids before marrying my mom, and they were my half brother and sister. And after that, they tried to like sue my mom for money that wasn't there. It was just it wasn't a passing where you got to grieve normally. There's a lot of controversy around it. And so my mind told me that was the Army's fault, primarily, not necessarily Uncle Sam or, anybody in the U.S. government. To me, that was the Army's doing. And I was almost convinced that's why I didn't want to be a part of the Army. And then when I started going to recruiting offices, that's when I was actually convinced that I didn't want to go into the Army, because it's like you see on meme videos, I walked in and the guy was on the phone and he didn't seem to want to talk to me or anything like that. And so I didn't even really want to talk to him about that much. I had received a letter from them. And so I just went down to the Marine office and started speaking to them. And they were the only ones who like tried to be my friend. Like the recruiter was like coming to my school, like checking on me, like taking me to lunch. I'm like, dude, I want to be part of these guys, like they seem cool. So it wasn't really like from the childhood moment that I was like, I'm going to be a Marine. It was kind of the last couple of years of thinking about it, just seeing how respected Marines were, and the commercials you see growing up, they were always the most
slaying dragons.
Oh yeah, it was great. You could do anything.
Yeah. So you said that you were you went to the boarding school, and I imagine that's kind of hard. I didn't go to boarding school, so how is that any different from like the military in general, like adapting to that military lifestyle?
It was probably the best thing for me in regards to that. I mean, you're talking about a very regimented schedule. You're staying in dorms that aren't terribly far off from barracks living quality. You have set chow times basically that you go eat, and everything is all surrounding a schedule and doing the right thing by the right, principles at the right times. Like basically they had 5 values that were just on the wall. I probably can't say them off the top of my head, but they're like integrity, character, humility. I want to say volunteering. Like hopefully the people from this school never see this because I should know this as long as I went there. But what I'm getting at is it was very values based. And also if you broke the rules, they enforced it very much like the military. They had this thing called 2-4, which stood for 24 hours of self-reflection, which in English meant shoveling snow, raking leaves, kind of like, it's a working party outside.
Yeah.
So I was on that many times, and you just learn. You learn eventually you're not going to beat the system in the same fashion. You just go along and do what you're told, and hopefully you learn something from it. But I made some good friends there that I still talk to today, and I try to go back and visit once in a while. I didn't leave there on a bad note or anything. So I went back in uniform, much like upperclassmen and alumni did when I was first there, and they were like that convinced 1 or 2 other guys to do the same thing. Come to find out later, so there's a lot of pride in just kind of going back to show like, here's what I've become.
Yeah, so you kind of get that, you kind of have that leg up feeling, going from boarding school to boot camp, like you're already regimented. So boot camp's done, you graduate, you get your E-Globe and Anchor. What's it like when you go to the fleet for the first time?
So, obviously you do MCT in the school, so spend time at Lejeune and then out at Fort Sill. But then I get to the fleet and I quickly find out that my unit that I'm to be attached to is in Japan.
Okay.
And because everything has just kicked off, like you're talking the beginning of 2003, like December, January 2003. So they end up attaching us to a headquarters unit up at Camp Margarita, and we go to Kuwait to Camp Commando, and this is before the invasion. Okay. So basically, from February to like July, I was there doing guard force at one of the ECPs with 2-6 out of Camp Lejeune.
Okay.
So basically went on that. One other guy that was there in that attachment with me when we came back ended up going to our fleet unit, who had come back from Okinawa in our time that we were gone. And so that whole process of being a boot, we got to miss a lot of that, which was nice because we didn't have a combat deployment, even though we had scuds ripping over our head, which we thought was a little ridiculous. But we were in a combat environment, for lack of better words, and those guys kind of respected that. And so we attached to Golf Battery 211 in Camp Pendleton and redeploy with them in 2004 to Iraq. And those were my deployments.
So how do you? So you said Kuwait wasn't like a combat deployment, but how does really that differ from, Iraq, when you're like, okay, this is the combat deployment?
In Iraq, we could see what was shooting at us and we could shoot back. In Kuwait, you're hiding in a concrete bunker in MOP 4 just hoping a Scud missile doesn't land in your general area. One thing that was really cool though is my stepdad is basically worked with like optical, engineering and equipment, and helped with the Hubble Space Telescope project, but he was on the Patriot missile project as well, parts of it. And so being able to see one of those take off and collide with a Scud or whatever midair, I got to witness, and that was pretty wild. But they said, you don't rate combat ribbons for this. And as a young kid, you're like, how's that possible? We have missiles literally, like I can almost touch them, it feels like.
Yeah.
So that's where you start learning about like the very specifics of military life and why things are the way they are. And the fact that we came back with a deployment to that area was respected by a lot of the like corporals and NCOs. There was certainly some NCOs that no matter what, they wanted to put us through the boot treatment, and me and this other guy kind of didn't like that, but we were PFCs and Lance Corporals, so it's like, what are we gonna do?
So you got done in Kuwait, it's 2003, then you instantly go back in 2004?
Yeah, I mean, we had some time in between. A lot. I mean, I would say, I think it was almost a year.
Okay.
But we were doing all field artillery training for the most part up until like the last 20% of that time, because we got word that we weren't being sent over to fire howitzers, that they wanted us to train essentially like a very small crash course in what grunts do. And in no way am I saying I'm a grunt, because I don't want those guys to get all touchy.
Yeah.
But basically, like, they called us provisional riflemen, and we were attached to RCT-7. And the training that we did, one of the parts of it was in this broken down neighborhood that was then evacuated in Riverside, California. And we got to go through and be the bad guy and the good guy. And that helped a lot of us build confidence to some extent when we were going over. Because we did go to Ramadi, we did go to Fallujah, we did see firefights, we did see a casualty in our unit. That wasn't the same as the first deployment at all. I get shit from some of the guys that say that Kuwait's not a deployment, never was, and I'll disagree for the rest of my life on that. Those 2003 Kuwait deployments, I think, counted for the people that were there.
Yeah. Some pretty intense situations.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, not being able to return fire is like a pretty helpless feeling.
Yeah. So what? So coming home, obviously, you said one's considered not, and one is. Like, what goes through your mind as you're leaving Kuwait, coming home, versus leaving Iraq and coming home? Like, how is your mental state in that situation?
I think so when we got attached to 211, when we got back, I think I was more mentally resilient towards being messed with, like doing all the games that boots get played on them when they get in the Marines, because to an extent, I had seen and heard while I was there of everything that had just popped off in February, March of 2003 during that invasion. And I was like, let's get past this. This is stupid. We're wasting time. And so anything that was like a mindless task, which almost everything in garrison is, I had a natural rub against. And you can read my military record, and that speaks for itself. Like, in garrison, I was not the best Marine. Deployed in a combat zone, that's where I thrived. And I was a fire team leader there. I got a CERTCOM while in Iraq. Came back, got my good conduct, and promoted to corporal. And then I went to Mexico, and that all got undone. So, it's just, if you had kept me there the whole time, I probably would have been a rock star. But I liked to have fun in between with my friends, and I think every Marine did. It's just who got caught.
Yeah. So, how many years did you serve?
4.
4? Okay, 4.
4 year and 1 day, because I was
4.
UA 1 day.
So is that the Mexico thing?
That's the Mexico thing.
Yeah, nice. So what was your you go through your 4 years, and then it's the process of leaving the military. Like, what was your process? Because they have like the steps and taps and all that kind of stuff, but like mentally, what is your process? Like, are you going back home? Where are you deciding to go and all that kind of stuff?
So I decided where I was going like a week before I got out.
Okay.
I was your typical fly by the seat type of guy at that point, because I had come back. I'll just say had a falling out with who I was actually married to back then. I've had a couple marriages, but it for reasons I won't say, it just failed. And so I had just got an annulment, just got like in trouble. So I was a little sour when I was getting out, not given a full blown, F you, but I just, I was ready. And I had been treated a little differently because PTSD wasn't a thing at that moment that anybody was going to deal with.
Right.
And if you mentioned any problems, even remotely close to that, especially drinking a lot, you were red flagged and put on watch and all this crazy stuff. So long story short, I put everything I owned into my vehicle, and I had a plan and followed through with that to drive to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, a place that I had never been in my life, that I had 2 friends from boarding school living there already.
Okay.
And they said, come on down and live with us, because they found out I really didn't have a plan, which this is my advice time for everybody that's listening for transitional period. Have a plan. I mean, did I go to Hilton Head and have the best time of my life and party all of my money away and, live like a beach bum bartender for 5-6 years? I did. But do I have anything to show for it? I don't. I was always just seeking the best moment. I am guilty of FOMO at times, so that always wore on me. But like, if I could go back and do it all differently, I at the very least would have started school at the same time that I got out, because that was an opportunity that I started using way too late. I only got to use 25% of my GI Bill before it expired.
Okay.
So at 41, I'm sitting here saying, like, my parents were probably telling me at the time, use your GI Bill, use your benefits, apply for them as soon as you get out. Don't wait. The process is not what your friends tell you. It's getting better every day, and there's organizations out there that'll help you with that. You can message me anytime. I have a plethora of them all over the U.S.
Yeah, like the big thing for me, I always tell, like, the big thing now is the smart transcript. All of your stuff now is recorded as college credits. People don't realize that.
Yep.
And so I get out. I was a comm guy, so I did all the MCIs that I could that was going to help me after when I go to school. Whoops, sorry. So for when I go to school, and my separation on my smart transcript, I had almost 86 credit hours.
Wow.
So I mean, it was nothing for me to go through, use my GI Bill, and still have some left over. Like that's my big thing is like use the resources and schooling that the military gives you, regardless if people tell you you're not going to make it when you get out because they're a bunch of lifers and whatnot. But it's use that stuff, and there's always a path forward for you when you're out.
I talk a lot about the VA, both good and bad.
Right.
But the bottom line is regardless of what certain negativities you hear about daily life at the VA, none of that takes away from the fact that you have benefits guaranteed to you, regardless of whether you served in combat or not.
Correct.
Depending on your discharge, if you weren't discharged dishonorably, there's so many, like, there's a plethora, and I think it really boils down to us as veterans not always wanting to just take a little bit of time to research and fill out a couple of documents. I mean, paperwork is the devil for veterans. I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody starts a service just filling out paperwork for vets could probably make millions.
Yeah.
So
how did the military affect you, and like what did you learn about yourself in this process? Because like you already had something similar, like you said, with the boarding school, but what after the military, what did you learn about yourself then?
So it's kind of the opposite. I spent the better part of the next almost 10 years forcing myself to not learn about myself via alcohol. I developed a really big, like the Marines, people say they drank the most when they were in the Marines, or some of them say that. That was just warming me up. The area that I moved to was a party almost all day, every day. And I thrived in that environment. And it really poured gas on a fire that was genetically wrong before I even existed. Alcoholism has been running in my family for a long time. So the deck was stacked against me in that regard. And so it took me until I was almost probably in my late 30s to not only appreciate the things that had still stuck with me from the military that I didn't even know, but to appreciate all the other guys and gals out there in the veteran community that are just there for each other. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter if it's rock climbing, fishing, hiking, sitting in group yoga, whatever it is that helps veterans. If you're helping each other, that's really what is needed to make this all keep going. Because if everybody wakes up tomorrow and says, man, I'm done helping these other vets, then that's a bad day.
Yeah.
And so I just try to remain appreciative that I'm still alive, honestly, because if I look back at my life from like remember those old flip books that were like animated?
Yep.
If I had to look through one of those in 10 seconds, it would just be like the movie Fight Club, basically. I mean, it's just chaos for like, I've finally just started slowing down and reflecting on a lot of things in the past 6-7 years since I started veterans fishing. And people ask me, what do you do? That's a very hard question to answer some days. And the only answer that comes to mind is whenever I'm gone, hopefully somebody sees my DMs and publishes them or something, because I've had more conversations on Facebook and Instagram DMs with people that I've never met that I now feel like family with all over the country. And it's insane.
Yeah. So, we talk about you moving to Hilton Head. Did you, and obviously you picked up drinking in the Marines, like you said, that was just like a prelude to what was to come. So like, did you have any like troubles adapting back to the civilian life after like that regimented schedule that you had from boarding school, the military, deployment, back to stateside and garrison, and now you're going back into the civilian world where you have no restrictions,
Zero
restrictions. So like what what difficulty did you have doing that? Like you said, you partied all the time, but what I guess to say, like, what other things made it hard for you to adapt?
It's really about the environment that you put yourself in when you get out. I mean, even though you've spent 4 years doing some hard charging stuff, whatever you did, a lot of guys and gals are still going back to in toxic environments. And I willingly put myself into that environment. And I won't say that I have regrets, because I met my daughter's mother there, and my daughter wouldn't be here without me ever going to South Carolina. But I knew going in there, and I had just come out of a 30-day, they called it Substance Abuse Rehabilitation Program, SART, in Marine Corps. And I was forced to go to that. And I stayed sober for maybe 2-3 weeks afterwards, and fell hard right off the wagon. And that fall happened all the way to Hilton Head. And so with your question of, like the regimenting, did that carry over in any way? Absolutely not. I had like, I had a job I had to go to. But other than that, I didn't have animals. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have any other job. There was just easy jobs that made tip money in a tourist environment. So to paint the picture, I was maybe working 15 hours a week, making a couple grand in cash. And for a kid on an island with no responsibility that likes to drink, that's dangerous territory. So when I say I thrived in that environment, it was just like, at the time, putting a fish in water, but very polluted water. And now I go back to that same island at 41 years old, sober, almost 10 years, and I get to see things every time that I didn't see living there for 6 years, that I didn't appreciate. I was just a drunken drone basically the entire time I was there.
Yeah, so when I got out in 2014, I struggled with the non-structure thing. Like, I had a family, I have a wife and kids, but I struggled with it. So I said, I'm going to join the Army Reserves. And I met some great leaders there. But, man, it was just not the same. Like, it gave me that structure one weekend a month. But, man, it was not the same as active duty. But it kind of helped me, like, that one weekend a month helped me, to where I am now, because there were some dark times within those 3 years or so. So now I got out in 2014. I joined them in 2016.
Okay.
And I did it till 2019 to finish out my full 8 years. But man, it was dark. But like I said, like those guys, they helped me a lot. And I've met some great leaders, but it's definitely not the same as active duty Marine Corps. I'll tell you that.
I can't even imagine.
So, you deal with the public a lot. You deal with veterans a lot. So, what is like some military civilian disconnect that is there, and what do you wish that civilians would understand about military life and veterans in general?
That we want to be friends with y'all. I think that's the biggest misconception, is that we all want to be segregated in our own little group. Some of my best friends on this planet are non-veterans, and they have a lot to offer. Stuff that we don't know in the real world. Like, we haven't been CPAs or lawyers or doctors for 25 years, or whatever these people have done while we were off doing our thing. They were living in the real world and dealing with stuff that we didn't potentially see or know about. So I think, number one, the biggest misconception is that we're like not approachable in some cases, and that's just not true. Secondly, don't think that any veteran's experience is above you trying to befriend them. They may have been through some horrible stuff, but that doesn't mean that they're looking for normalcy, or doesn't mean that they're not looking for normalcy in life with, friends that don't have that experience. And even though I have a lot of combat friends, I think the last thing is that people think that we just sit around and talk about blood, guts, and death all the time. And the older that you get, the less that you want to talk about those types of things, or even be around them for that much. So in a nutshell, I think it's still a perceived thing that we're all a bunch of crazies. And I just think that each community, both veteran and non-veteran, have so much to offer each other. It just gets underutilized. Like, veterans love working with other veteran-owned companies when they're doing giveaways, collabs, things like that, which is great. But veer out of that lane once in a while is all I'm saying.
Yeah. it's such a big thing because, like you said, we're just trying to when we get out, we're just trying to fit in. You
Yep.
know, I told this to Jake Decker when he was the previous guest that was on this. It's like we get out, and when we come back to our situation, it's like we put our life on pause, and we're just trying to reacclimate to what the way of the world is now from the 4 years that we were prior. 4, 8, 10, whatever it is. Like
Yep.
we're trying to assimilate to that. We're just trying to fit in, and people get they like you said we get bad rep sometimes talking about people think we talk about guns and all that stuff all the time, but we're just trying to fit in, and I think that's the biggest thing is the acclimation uh, for
Absolutely.
for us and them together to be cohesive, and the more that we understand about that kind of stuff, the better that they understand us. It's for a better world. We don't have like I saw you share the unfortunate numbers for veteran suicide recently. So, that's a terrible situation. So, sneaking into that, here in the top corner, it's QR code for veteransfishing.com if you guys want to go visit that. Veterans fishing. You said you're a fisherman growing up. The idea of conception and how that gets going. Go ahead and fill us in on that one.
So I had basically been in the midst of the last few months leading up to my second marriage failing, for very different reasons. But either way, it was just not a great time. I was not a very happy dude. And then I was out fishing one day, and this was before, a few years before veterans fishing came along, but I was out and I caught my PB. Very grainy video that I still have on my Motorola Razr phone. But it was 8 pounds, 6 ounces. And that fish changed my whole perspective on fishing again, because I basically left it when I went into the military and didn't come back to it until a few months prior to that. I was just too focused on partying. And I had already had my daughter was already in the picture at this point. And so when my divorce started, I had just shortly thereafter been approved for disability benefits, which I'd also been fighting for a long time. And it allowed me a certain amount of freedom to be able to start something on social media that I had been kind of just thinking about every time I went fishing, which is there's got to be other vets out there that love to fish that would just love to connect with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the crux of the whole beginning, is start a community with people who have served, combat or not, and they enjoy fishing, but furthermore, fishing in some way is helpful, therapeutic, whatever positive. Exactly. That's the whole reason that shirt got made. That is what it is to a lot of people. And there's a lot of people that don't know that's what it is yet, and they're doing it every day, but they're distracted by social media or, I've seen people that I started following that were real fishing people, but social media and the grasp of social media has gotten to them to the point where all we see now is, drones and, this and that. It's lost its naturalness.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm more about is when you're on a boat, when you're not saying you can't be on social media, take pictures. That's how we deliver this feeling to each other.
Correct.
But also allowing yourself to be in that moment is a thing that is very hard these days. It used to not be hard, but now it's hard because we all have, these.
Yeah.
So just being able to find a way to tune your brain into nature despite any chaos that might be going on up there. those are the people that I was initially trying to connect with. Like, you don't have to be a combat vet. I'm just saying, like, if you're a veteran and you deal with stress and your outlet is fishing, I want to be your friend. That was kind of the beginning of it. And then as time went on, I'm like, man, I want to be a part of this. I want to help. Like, I see these nonprofits that are starting off here and there, and I didn't start a nonprofit from day one because of the divorce I was going through. I didn't want that to get dissolved or affected in any way, shape, or form. So that's why I started it as an LLC, and that's why it kind of remains that way to this day.
Mm-hmm.
It also allows me the freedom to do different things with the money, which, like, for example, I've fed people on certain nights that I've just been talking to them and they're in a bad way and they mention that they can't even buy dinner for them and their kids or something. I will Venmo them money. And so it's not always me trying to help fund fishing trips. It's I've had to buy a measuring board or two for people to join these tournaments that I have. That's the only thing that was stopping them. So I'm like, hey, if I buy you a measuring board, will you jump in these tournaments?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all it takes. But it started, the money idea of trying to help, started out with apparel, started out with t-shirts, hats. I've always been a hat guy. If you look at any picture of me back to 5 years old, I have a hat on.
Yeah, I feel you.
So I feel like I know hats probably better than most things. And so I've just tried to have cool hats. And you're literally the top hat buyer as of like a couple months ago. So you and Chris from K-Bar were having a little race that you didn't know about.
Yeah, you got the K-Bar hat on too.
I do, yeah. But you absolutely took him over in the amount of hats. So it was like you, him, Thurman Outdoor Things are like the three biggest VF hat people. And not to say the other 7 out of top 10 aren't noticed, but every fisherman wears a hat for the most part. And everybody on the water for the most part wears a hat. So I just try to keep cool hats coming and try to keep people in tune with the fact that one hat doesn't pay for a whole fishing trip.
Right.
It takes like 30 hats, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
So just meeting people, like setting the expectations for what I do is something that I'm constantly like reminding folks of, is that, I'm not a nonprofit, but I try to be the intermediary between all these veterans that have no idea where fishing might be close by them and me putting them in touch with those people that they might be looking for. And I think you've probably even seen it, but a lot of people, I'm not going to take any credit for it, just the fact that page has been there, has a lot of friends have been made on that page.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the coolest thing ever. That's why I started it, for people to meet each other. And it almost makes me choke up a little bit to know, just to think of like a few pairs of friends that now exist because of that page is cool. But now most of what I do is just like field messages from people that are like, hey, I'm Joe Schmo, and oh, look at the little thumbs up. It says that like, I'm Joe Schmo from Spokane, Washington, and hey, can I find fishing? So basically just going to put that up every time it comes in, and it's been working so far. But people who want to volunteer their time and people who want to be the one to go fishing, I want messages from both of them. And I even have an extra phone now that I'm going to be releasing the number for in the next few days, so people can call, leave a voicemail, and say exactly that. I am so-and-so, I'm an Army vet from wherever. I'm looking to go fishing.
Yeah, because your growth has been like, I remember, like, was it last year you were just under 10,000? Now you're like 40,000.
47 today.
40,
yeah.
I mean, that's meteoric, in today's age. Like, and then you were sharing these messages of people saying, "Hey, I want to go fishing," like you're talking about, and then you have the connections like DWCC over there on the West Coast. You got the guys over on the East Coast. Yeah. And like you just went on a fishing trip with some of your friends, some deep sea fishing down at Hilton Head Island. So that's really cool. And it's just great to see like the veteran community coming together and being strong for one another, and then, like you said, making friends. That's basically what it's all about.
And that everything that you just said encompasses why I do that. I call it a personal trip, but it's kind of like still a veterans trip in a sense. But that started as K-Bar and Leatherneck for Life wanted to go fishing together for their 40th birthday, and they invited me to come along because I set them up with my friend from South Carolina who had the boat. 4 years later, we're doing it as an annual thing. But the flip side to that, which you alluded to earlier, is that they haven't always had that connection with civilians. They're very, very military-oriented, military-friendly. Not to say they don't have civilian friends, but my buddy Al, who lives in Hilton Head, knows everybody.
Okay.
So when we go places, it's almost like VIP treatment, and they love that, and that's a side that not a lot of veterans get to see unless it's like a special day at the ballpark and we're all jammed into one section.
Yeah.
It's like, hey guys, it's like almost undercover getting to experience, just, I don't want to say escaping from veteran life, but just hitting the pause button on it for a night or two here and there is not a bad thing. Because it can be overloading when you're around other vets, and the talk can get too much, or maybe you just want to change your pace. But regardless, that trip, I want to replicate that. There's other boat owners out there, and the nice thing is I can go fishing just about anywhere in this country right now. That's my pay. I have a book of people essentially on my phone, of people even like yourself that I know where they're located, and I know if I said, hey, I'm coming to your neck of the woods, I'd be welcomed with open arms.
Absolutely.
So that's an awesome feeling.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I appreciate you coming on here. And like I said, people, top corner here, that's the QR code to veteransfishing.com. Go buy some merch, fund some fishing trips for some veterans. Again, Matt, appreciate you coming on. I know it's been a long time coming, and look forward to actually fishing with you soon. So,
dude,
everyone, thanks for watching us. Do you have anything else to say?
Keep those minds right and those lines tight, baby.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, take it easy and you have a good one.